This was a Monday night. I'd gotten out of work at 8 and went straight home to hop online and game with some of my buddies. I had gotten divorced a few months ago, which left me with just an empty house and not much to do outside of work. So gaming with my friends all night was mostly all I did, and I can't say I didn't enjoy it. Anyway, I knew there was supposed to be a big thunderstorm overnight, and there were even flash flood warnings. But around here, they pretty much send out those warnings every time it rains, so it was never a big deal. At about 11 p.m. though, I was in the middle of a game with my buddies when a sudden massive gust of wind slammed against the window next to me, and the entire house shook. I took my headset halfway off, and I could hear rain pouring down and the house creaking and swaying violently. I turned back to my screen to tell everyone what was going on, but suddenly my screen and all the lights in my house flicked off for a split second, then right back on. I saw I was still in the Discord call, so I asked if they could still hear me, but before I got an answer, everything cut out. My PC shut down and all the lights snapped off. The whole house was dark. I couldn't even see my hands in front of my face. I felt around my desk for my phone, then turned the light on. Annoyed, I got up and walked downstairs and up to the front window. Honestly, it was hard to say if everyone else's power was off or not. I could barely see anything through the flood of rain that was pouring down, and most people's houses would usually be dark by now anyways, since it was so late. I quickly sent a message in the group chat saying I probably wouldn't be on for the rest of the night. Frustrated, I used my little phone light to find my way to the basement. I went down and found my old battery bank. It wasn't much, but it was enough to plug a few lamps into so I could at least have some light. I grabbed it and started walking back up to the stairs when I thought I heard something behind me. It was just a bunch of boxes back there, but the wind seemed to pick up as soon as I turned around, so I assumed it was just the storm making the house make noises. I hauled the battery bank up to the first floor and plugged in one of the lamps in the living room. I'm not sure if this is normal or not, but I hated going to bed with the power out. Like I had to wait for it to come back on before I'd feel comfortable sleeping. So I opened up the blinds and sat on the couch, then took my phone out and used my data to scroll through YouTube. An hour or so went by before I got curious again, and this time opened the front door to look outside. My porch had an overhang that blocked most of the rain, so I stepped out and looked around. The storm was still raging on, but the houses across the street didn't seem to be off power. At least a couple of them had a light or two on in the windows. Now I was pretty confused. I looked up outages in my area, but didn't find much info. I went back inside. Oddly, only a minute later, I got a text. It was from a normal, unknown phone number, but essentially said that there was down power lines and to expect power outages. I had no clue why I got a direct text though, and the number didn't have an ID, like from ComEd or whatever. Strange, I thought, but I didn't look much more into it. I went back to the couch. Again, I was on my phone, but more so to just listen to videos while I watched the storm out the window. But then, I heard something from the other side of the house. It sounded exactly like a footstep on one of the creaky wooden steps to the basement. I'd lived here long enough to recognize that sound. I got up, but walked slowly and quietly over there, wanting to hear if it happened again. The house was so dark, and my phone light only lit up a small view in front of me. I turned the corner into the hallway and shined the light down. Nothing was there. However, the basement door was open, like wide open, and there was no way I left it like that. I walked up and shined the light down the stairs, but there was no way I was gonna go down there to check anything out, not with no power on. I closed the door. I don't think I had enough time to really think about what this really meant. I walked into the next room. Light from the thunderstorm flashed in the windows, but when I looked around, I found nothing. A feeling built up in me though, like something was off, and my gut could sense it. I started to walk back, when suddenly heavy footsteps came running up the basement stairs. Even behind the closed door, they were loud and shook the whole floor. Without thinking, I ran up to the door and slammed my body against it. Not even a second later, they were on the other side trying to open it. Once they figured out I was there, they started hitting it and ramming their shoulder into it to try to force the door open. This was a regular basement door, so it had no lock on it. I didn't know what else to do. He pounded against it for a minute, but when I pulled my phone out and started calling 911, he stopped. I heard his footsteps go back down the stairs, and I took this chance to get in my car and leave. I tried to watch from the other side of the road to see if he left, but during the 10 minutes I waited, I didn't see anything. 3 officers went in and found nobody inside. He had left through the back door. What I find most disturbing about this situation is that we confirmed the text I received about the power outage was fake, like from a private personal phone. So whoever this guy was that broke in, he knew enough about me to find my phone number. He wasn't targeting just some random house. We think he texted me once he heard me go outside, probably knowing I was checking if other houses had power, and wanting me to not get suspicious and check the breaker box in the basement. There was no outage. He had shut off my power. That's about where it was left though. No new info on who it could have been or what they wanted has been found out. This was in spring of 2021. I'm a 24-year-old male, and at the time, I'd been living away from my family while I was studying at an out-of-state college. Our school had a fairly early spring break, which meant I'd get to go home and visit my family. It was about a 2-day drive to get there, and mostly through long, boring roads. I'd take the drive over flying any day though. I left on a Tuesday morning. I actually woke up early and hit the road well before I planned to, so I was doing great on time. I didn't have the route really planned out though. I just had a general idea of where I'd be making my first overnight stop at. I drove almost 10 hours straight, only stopping for food and gas. Around 8 p.m., I decided I'd done enough for today, and at the next gas station, I pulled up the map and looked for the nearest hotel I could stay at. I was in the middle of nowhere, but I knew there had to be something within 20 to 30 miles at least. Thankfully, I found one. It wasn't too far actually. The directions told me to go down the road behind the gas station, away from the highway. This road looked very old and had very few streetlights that didn't do much for lighting up the road, and there were no cars coming down. I drove about 5 minutes, passing through a very small, old-fashioned town, and at the end of the street was the hotel. It was a small building, just as old as all the others. I parked in the empty parking lot, then grabbed my bags and walked inside. The lights were very dim, like weirdly dim, and nobody was at the counter. As I stood there, I just looked around. It was so quiet. No kids running around, or TVs on in the lobby. It was just empty. After a minute, someone finally came walking down the back hallway, and she looked startled when she saw me. She quickly walked up to the front counter and greeted me, then got me a room for the night. I thanked her and walked down the hallway. She gave me the room all the way at the end. I unlocked it and got in. I didn't even unpack anything really, I just sat on the small sofa and went on my phone for a while. The room wasn't very big or nice, which I wasn't expecting anyway. This was clearly just an older and smaller, probably family-run hotel. I remember just laying on my back on the sofa, scrolling through videos on my phone, and I guess falling asleep. I woke up abruptly to someone banging on the room door. I quickly sat up, shaken by how sudden and loud it was. My eyes looked over at the clock on the wall. It was 11 p.m. Concerned, I got up and walked over to the door, opening it. Nobody was there. I poked my head out and looked down the hallway. I stayed there for 30-ish seconds, really confused and waiting for someone to come back around or something. But the hotel was really quiet still. Everything was so off, I started second-guessing myself. Like, was the knock even at my door? It sounded like it was, and I didn't hear anyone else in any of the rooms near me. But maybe somehow it was for one of the other rooms. I went back to the couch for a little bit, then took a shower and got ready for bed. I set an alarm for 8 a.m. and fell asleep. I really wanted to sleep good tonight, because for one, I was really tired, and two, I had another long drive ahead of me. However, I woke up again in the middle of the night to someone banging on the door. I jumped up again, and this time I hurried up to the door. The whole room was dark, and I could only see the sliver of light coming out from under the door. I swung it open, but nobody was there again. I did the same thing, looking down the hall and listening. After a minute, I decided that this was too strange to not investigate a little further. Tiredly, I walked down the hallway and to the front desk. It was just as dark and quiet as it was when I first arrived here. The woman was still at the desk though. I told her someone had been banging on my door and asked if she saw anyone. The woman looked really confused, and almost as if I was joking. When she realized I wasn't, she then said that I was the only guest staying here tonight. I just smiled and said okay, then started walking back to my room. I don't think it had really set in yet. Like, was I just going crazy? I got back to my room and went in. I made sure that all the locks were in place, then got in bed. I just laid there for a minute, staring at the pitch black ceiling and trying to think about what was going on, before I decided to grab my phone from the nightstand and maybe watch a video or two to get me to relax. However, right when my screen turned on, it lit up the room just enough for me to see something in the corner by the bed. I jumped up and backed away from the bed. There was someone there, standing in the dark in the back corner of the room. They were still, motionless, just watching me. My heart was burning from how hard it was pounding in my chest. I hurried over to the door. As soon as I began removing all the locks, I heard them start rushing up behind me. Their loud footsteps against the floor got closer and closer as I finally swung open the door and sprinted down the hallway. The front desk woman jumped when she saw me, but her eyes quickly darted past me. The man was running up behind me. She started calling 911, but just when the guy got into the lobby, he sprinted out the door. He didn't get into a car or anything. He just ran off. The woman explained that she had no idea who that was, and that he should not have been inside the hotel, again saying that I was the only guest checked in for the night. Police came and did a rather quick investigation. The hotel only had 2 working cameras, one in the lobby and one outside, so it wasn't all that useful. The only thing we know is that the man definitely slipped into my room while I was asking the woman about the knocking. We don't know what he wanted from me, or why he was even there at all. I got my things and left that night, obviously not wanting to stay any longer. I still have no idea what that was about, but it was definitely the most terrifying experience of my life. I was going on a camping trip with my best friend. I'm gonna call him Henry. We'd done a few trips before, but we still mostly considered ourselves new to it. We hadn't done anything too crazy up until this point. Usually we'd go to local campgrounds that had other people around, but we thought we were confident enough to do something more adventurous. Both of us wanted to camp at an actual campsite that was cool, with a view and further in the forest. You know, like real camping. We did some research and found a place about 3 hours from us. It was a 4-hour hike into the forest, and it only had a couple pictures from previous campers, so it didn't seem like it'd be busy. We drove down there, prepared for 3 days. There was a very small dirt area on the end of an otherwise unused road in the middle of the forest. Nobody else was parked there. The trail looked like an actual trail, or at least it looked like it was one at some point. It hadn't been kept up with, so some parts were overgrown and weathered. I mean, it was in the middle of nowhere, it seemed, so I wasn't expecting the most taken care of trail, but this looked like it was abandoned for years. Still, we kept walking. It thinned out as we got further into the forest, but around mid-afternoon, we got to the campsite. It was no more than a grassy area on top of a small hill, but it had a decent overlook of the forest, and was very secluded. Nobody else was there, and from the looks of it, nobody had been there in a long time. We set up our tents and got everything unpacked. Henry was taking a bit longer than me, so while I waited, I walked up to the overlook and just enjoyed the view. While I was there, I noticed something move in the trees below us. It was really hard to see through the dense branches and leaves, but I barely caught a glimpse of a group of people walking, maybe 4 or 5 of them. I was so surprised to see other people out here, especially not on a campsite. From where I was though, I couldn't see anything aside from their basic figures moving through the forest, so I couldn't tell if they were campers or hikers or what. I tried to point them out to Henry, but by the time he came over, they were already gone, disappeared in the forest. After a few minutes, we were back to going about our day. We kind of just hung out for the next few hours, talking and whatever, until the sun started going down. We built up a small campfire and sat around it. The night was calm for the first couple hours. It was quiet, only the sound of us talking and the crackling campfire between us. But then we heard something else. It was faint, but we both heard it. It sounded like voices, multiple, talking back and forth. We couldn't tell what they were saying, or even if they were speaking our language. It was coming from way out in the trees though, which made it really creepy. Henry and I didn't know what to do, so we just listened for a bit, but the voices didn't seem to move. They stayed in the same spot out there, until they suddenly went quiet. The next minute or so was really unnerving. We didn't hear the voices fade out or leave. They just stopped, like they were still right out there. Then there were footsteps, just one set walking toward us. A few seconds later, a man came out of the dark and into the light of our campfire. He had a distinct red baseball cap and longish wavy black hair. His smile was wide as he walked up to us. "Either of you know where the trail is around here? I've been looking for a while." I said yeah, and pointed ahead at the trail. But when he didn't immediately say anything or leave, I then asked if the others out there were with him. His face fell flat for a moment. Then he smiled again and looked back at where I was looking. "I didn't know there were others out here. I've just been hiking alone. I would have asked them for directions if I saw them," the man said. It was really strange though. I was almost sure he was lying. He came from the same direction we just heard the voices in. I just said okay, and he smiled, then left and went down the trail. Henry was thinking the exact same thing as I was, that the guy was lying for some reason. There was no way he just came out from the same area as the group of voices and wasn't with them, or at least didn't even notice them. But the more unsettling question is, why was he lying? Why didn't he want to tell us about the others in the forest? We discussed this around the campfire for a while, maybe 30 minutes, trying to figure out what the hell was going on, or if there even was something going on. The whole time, it felt like we were being watched. I kept turning around and looking at the forest and at the trail. Something felt wrong. It definitely didn't help that this was our first time being so far out like this, so nerves were already high. "Should we just leave?" Henry finally said in a shaken voice. After some thought, I said yes. We started packing, but that eerie feeling only felt like it was getting stronger. Just as we tossed our bags on our shoulders and stomped out the campfire, a single footstep crunched in the leaves behind me. We both swung our heads around. Without the fire, it was pitch black. It also felt like the woods were eerily quiet now. After a moment, my shaky hand reached into the side of my backpack and got out my flashlight. I pointed it out and clicked it on. Standing only 10 or 15 feet in front of me was that same guy from before with the red baseball hat. He was standing in place, already looking at us, and had a blank stare. As I held the light on him, he made that same wide smile from before. In a panic, I turned off the light and both of us sprinted to the trail. Disturbingly, I could hear multiple other footsteps chasing behind us, and some even sounding like they were running through the woods beside us. Slowly though, they started to fade out. Eventually, it was just us two, running down the dark trail. We made it back to the car unharmed. We got in and drove away. We were both pretty shaken for a while after that. Honestly, I have no idea what was going on there. Why was anyone there at all? It's been a long time since this happened, but we haven't been out camping at all. I don't know if we ever will. This was 4 years ago, but I still find myself thinking about it every now and again. It was storming pretty bad this night. I worked as an Uber driver, so on nights like these, it often gets really slow. Sometimes I don't even get a single pickup. Regardless, I always stayed out and waited, either driving around listening to music or sitting in an empty parking lot and watching YouTube on my phone. Even if I'd only get a few pickups, it's still worth the extra money that I wouldn't have made otherwise. This night was as expected. Nobody was out or going anywhere with a storm like this. For the first while, I stayed in a parking lot, sitting on my phone and listening to the storm run through the town. After an hour, I went and drove through to get some food, then went back to the parking lot and waited some more. Eventually, I got the notification that someone requested a pickup. I clicked on it, and it said they were 25 minutes from me, and they needed to be dropped off another 20 minutes away from where they were. Usually when this happens, it's because no other Uber drivers are working, so I'll be the closest available driver, even though I'm far away. I had nothing better to do this night though. I accepted it and started heading over to them. They had placed the pinpoint location of where to pick them up at. The drive there felt like it took forever. Maybe it was the storm outside, or just the fact that nobody else was on the road. At certain points, I even almost forgot I was going to pick someone up, and it felt more like I was just driving aimlessly. It didn't help that the road it was taking me down was going out in the middle of nowhere. Like, I'm not even sure I've ever been that far in that direction, because nothing was out there. Finally, after just about 35 minutes, I made it to the pinpointed location on the map. It was at the corner of two roads, but two roads in the middle of literally nothing. Empty fields of trees on either side of me, and more importantly, nobody was there. I confirmed on the app that I'd arrived at the location, then just sat in my car and looked around, wondering what the hell they were doing way out here with a storm overhead. After a minute of looking around, I looked down at my phone again and started texting them to see where they were. Just then, I saw someone in my side mirror coming up behind my car. They opened the door and got in. I had no idea where they even came from. I never saw them on the road, or even out by all the trees. The man was absolutely drenched in rain though, and had a disturbed, almost angry look. "You ordered the Uber," I said, and he responded by stating my first name, which confirmed he was the right guy. I started driving. A few minutes went by, and something about him felt off. First of all, he was sitting in the middle of the back seats, so he was right in view of my mirror every time I looked back. And he also just had this really uneasy vibe, like he was up to something. I really wanted to ask what brought him out here, and why he was out in the pouring rain in the middle of nowhere, but I also didn't want to cause any trouble. As we got further out into what only looked to be even more uninhabited areas, I thought it best to ask and maybe get an answer that would make me feel better. "Hey, so what brings you out here anyway? I mean, with the storm and all," I said in as friendly a manner as possible. I looked at him in the mirror. His eyes darted away from mine. He looked like he was going to say something though, but then he didn't. He completely ignored the conversation and looked really suspicious while doing so. That didn't make me feel good at all. Even worse, the guy seemed to get antsy now, looking around more and keeping an eye on me in the mirror. Having to focus on the road with the rain pouring on the windshield, it was really unnerving not being able to see what he was up to behind me. But then he suddenly spoke. "Drop me off here." Confused, I started to ask if he was sure, but he cut me off, repeating himself. "Drop me off here." He demanded it. Something was clearly wrong, and I wanted no part of it. I did as he said, pulling over to the side of the road. He moved toward the door to leave, but I caught his eyes happen to glance at my phone, which was sitting on the center console with the Uber app open. He put his hand on the door, but hesitated. After a brief pause, he glanced back at my phone, then pulled his own phone out and checked it for something. Somehow, in that moment, I knew exactly what was going through his head. He'd been reminded that the app had his full name and everything, and so whatever he was up to, and that I was clearly suspicious about, would be linked directly back to him. I knew it the second I saw his eyes look at my phone, the realization setting into him. Don't worry. I'll cancel the ride from my end. It won't charge you," I said, hoping to redirect his thoughts and in a way fake that I wasn't suspicious of anything, and that by canceling it, maybe he'd think his info would be deleted or something. He glared at me, his eyes still angry and dead. And after another few seconds of hesitation, he left out the door. He walked out into the storm and was hidden by the fog and rain within seconds. I drove away immediately, before he could change his mind. Even though I had basically no evidence that this guy was up to anything, I still quickly reported his behavior to the police. You just never know. Several days went by, with nothing, until I got a really unfortunate call. Someone went missing that night, last seen near the forest that was just off the road I'd picked the man up from. They called for more information on what happened that night, but after giving them everything I could, they didn't find him or anything else. Unfortunately, with the storm, any tracks or evidence was likely washed away and gone by the time any searches could be made. They never found the missing person or the man I picked up. I was the last known person to encounter him. I think I'm really lucky that I didn't go missing that night as well. This was only a few months ago from the time I'm writing this. I work an overnight job at a warehouse, so I'm usually home sleeping during the day and am awake between 6 p.m. to about 9 or 10 a.m., even on my days off because I like to keep my body on the same schedule. This night, I was at work until 4 a.m. When I got off, I headed straight home, getting there at just about 4:15. All the roads were empty and quiet. However, when I got up to my house, there was a car parked right next to my driveway. I slowed down as I passed it and turned in, getting a better look at it. It was an old black sedan with heavily tinted windows. I couldn't see through any of them, and all its lights were off. I pulled into my garage and parked, taking one more look down the driveway before heading inside. The way this neighborhood was laid out, there was a decent amount of spacing between each home, so usually it was pretty easy to park right by whatever house you're visiting or whatever. So parking right by my house seemed really unnecessary when there were so many open places to park along the road. Initially, I dismissed it as someone visiting my neighbors. Maybe they had a party or something, and all the spots on the road closer to their house were taken beforehand. I checked one more time out the windows that morning, about an hour later, and the car was gone. The rest of that day went by as usual. I slept until 6, then got ready for another night at work. When I pulled out of the driveway to leave for work, the car wasn't there, so I really had no reason to think about it anymore. I went through my work night, which was a bit more tiring than usual, but I was looking forward to my night off tomorrow. The shift dragged on until I finally got out and drove home. Again, it was the middle of the night, and no cars were out at all. But when I got home, that same old car was there, parked in the same spot as last night. I did what I did before, slowly passing it and trying to see in the windows, but it looked no different than before. This time, after parking in the garage, I walked down to the end of the driveway just to get a closer look. As I was walking there, I thought I saw something move inside the car, behind the tinted window. It was just a glimpse out of the corner of my eye, so I couldn't tell for sure. I guess it could have been just a reflection on the outside of the window, too. I walked up, maybe 10 feet from the car, as I wasn't comfortable approaching directly up to it, especially if someone was in there. Even then, I couldn't see anything else. Before leaving, I decided to snap a photo of their license plate, just in case this became a recurring problem, but I figured I'd never actually have to use it. Better safe than sorry, though. I went back inside. Just like last night, I checked again a while later and the car was gone. Really strange, but it wasn't exactly harming me in any way, so I didn't think there was much else to do about it. I made dinner and watched TV for a couple hours, then got in bed and slept until 6 or 7 p.m. The sun was already set by the time I woke up. Having the night off, I did my usual long walk around the neighborhood. When I left the house, the car wasn't there, but when I got back from my hour-long walk, it suddenly was, parked right there in the same spot as the previous 2 nights. I mean, I just walked the entire neighborhood and maybe saw 1 or 2 other cars parked on the street. So why was this one always right in front of my house, and only at night? I walked up to it, and this time got right up by the window, putting my hand above my eyes and against the window to block out the reflection so that I could see inside. The car was empty, no people, and not really anything at all to give me hints as to why they were here. This was one of those off situations where it was really odd, but also they weren't harming me in any way at all, so it wasn't simple as to what to do about it. I went back inside the house. First thing I did was grab my phone, which I'd left charging on my nightstand while I was out walking. But when I picked it up, I saw an unusual notification. It was a motion detection alert from one of my security cameras. For reference, I had a camera on my front porch, but it only faced the door, so it never goes off unless someone was right outside the door. I also had 3 cameras inside my home, in all the main rooms. The notification didn't specify which camera detected motion, so I opened the app and checked. There was a 60-second clip saved by the app. I watched it, and for pretty much the whole time, the house was completely silent and there wasn't any movement. I was just starting to think this was a misinput by the system, but in the last 5 seconds of the video, something suddenly moved past the very bottom of the camera. It was really quick. They were only in the frame for a fraction of a second, and only part of their head and shoulders were caught. I felt my hands go numb while I held the phone. The room the footage was from was the bedroom I was currently standing in. Suddenly, the silence of the house was deafening. I could literally hear my heart beating as I slowly turned around and started darting my eyes all across the room. They could be anywhere, even watching me right now. All the thoughts rushing through my head only made me panic even more. Realizing I needed to leave, I hurried toward the doorway and out of the room. Instantly, I heard movement from the bedroom right behind me, and by the time I got to the stairs, footsteps were rushing down the hallway. They were maybe only 15 feet behind me. I got to the front door and sprinted right into the woods. In the intensity of the moment, I never even turned around to see who it was chasing me. I was more focused on getting out of there alive. Eventually, it was only my footsteps crunching on the leaves, covered by the darkness of the woods. I called 911. When they arrived, the car was gone, but thankfully I had the picture of their license plate from the day before. It only took 3 hours to find and arrest them. It was a guy in his mid-20s, and he looked completely deranged. Honestly, if I'd turned back and saw him chasing me through my house, I probably would have been so terrified that I would have tripped or something. The guy didn't seem to have any real reason for targeting me, but it was extremely evident that he was in fact targeting me. There were multiple pictures on his phone of my house, and even some looking through the windows at night at me sitting in my living room. He also had notes on when I left and got home from work every day for the last 2 weeks. Disturbingly, we still don't know how he got into my home and all around the cameras. And if he was able to get in unnoticed, there's no way to know if that was the first time he'd broken in. With how long and intently he was stalking me, he could have somehow had knowledge of where all the cameras were, and it could have been that this was just the first time he'd made the mistake of slightly walking in view of one of the cameras in my bedroom. Regardless, I shouldn't have to worry about him for a long time now. This was on what I thought was going to be a normal weekday for me. However, it turned out to be far from that. Being early April, it was raining a lot around here. My job was partially indoor and partially outdoor, so it was always 10 times worse when it was raining, and wore me out by the time my shift was over. I got off at 6 this day. I drove through the rain 30 minutes to my home, which was nestled away in the rural part of town. Strangely, as I pulled down my driveway, which was just mud at this point from all the rain, I noticed another set of tracks, like another car had recently driven down to my house. I didn't think much of it, assuming it was a mail truck or something, until I got home and noticed no mail or deliveries at my doorstep. Odd, but from the tracks, it looked like when they got to the house, they just did a 3-point turn and left. Probably just made the wrong turn. I went inside and got out of my soaked work uniform, then went to the kitchen to whip up something quick for dinner. It was maybe 7:30 when I thought I heard a knock somewhere by the front door. I say thought because it was only a single knock, and it was kind of quiet. Plus, with the rain and all, it was hard to hear. I got up from the living room and walked to the other side of the house to check the front door. When I opened it, I was smacked in the face by rain and wind, and yet nobody was even on my porch. I looked around for a few seconds before shutting the door to save myself from getting drenched. It was probably nothing anyway. I went back to the living room where I was watching a show while scrolling on my phone. Nothing really happened for a while, at least an hour, before I got up from the couch to use the bathroom. When I walked out of the room, though, I noticed something really weird. There was a mark on the floor. It looked like a little bit of dirt or mud, which really stood out because the tile floors were white. I knew I didn't wear my shoes through the house, especially not with them being muddy and wet from outside. Also, I was confused how I didn't notice it before. Where the spot was basically right behind my couch, which faced the other direction because the TV was on the far wall. I grabbed a rag and wiped it up, but still felt really weird about it. It seemed like it was gonna be just one of those things that happen sometimes, where you never really understand it, but it's not exactly meaningful in any way, so you just forget about it and move on. Thing is, it did cross my mind that maybe it was someone else, but it felt more like me just scaring myself over nothing. I used the bathroom, then went back to the couch. I'd be lying if I said I just forgot about it, though. This felt different, like I had a bad gut feeling about it. I couldn't help but constantly check over my shoulder, sensing that I was being watched, like that feeling you get after watching a horror movie. With the couch set up the way it was, the whole bottom floor of the house was behind me, which kind of felt unsettling now. It got to the point where I was so uncomfortable that I had to turn the TV off and go upstairs to my bedroom. At least in there, I could be in my bed backed up against a wall without the feeling that something was behind me. I had a small TV in there as well, so I just continued with my night the same as I was. 20 or so minutes passed, and feeling more comfortable in my room, I was just starting to forget about everything, when I suddenly heard something from outside my bedroom door. I'm not sure what exactly it sounded like. It was just a muted thump, maybe a footstep or something hitting the wall. I didn't know, but it was enough to make me instantly feel unsettled again. I got out of bed and walked up to the door. I put my ear against it and listened. I didn't hear anything. I stood in place for a moment while I gathered up the courage to open the door, telling myself I had to make sure nothing was going on. I opened the door and looked down the hallway. It was empty and quiet. I knew if I wanted any kind of a peaceful night, I'd have to check around the house as well. The only other room upstairs was the spare bedroom, which was a rarely used library/office space. I started to walk over, when, out of nowhere, the TV downstairs turned on, and I could suddenly hear the show I'd been watching being played at full volume. My heart burned in my chest from the fear that just shot through me. I sprinted down the hallway and ran downstairs. The whole floor was dark, except for the TV light, flickering and flashing on the walls. I turned the corner into the living room, unsure what to expect. But nobody was in there. I carefully and cautiously walked up to the TV, scanning the whole room as I did, and used the button on the back to turn it off. Was this somehow just the TV glitching, or was something actually going on? All the random things that had happened that night all just kind of added up. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and began clearing every area of the house. I should have called the cops right then and there, but honestly in the moment, it didn't seem like it would be much of a help if someone was there, because they wouldn't make it for another 10 or 15 minutes anyway. I cleared the whole first floor, and through all of it, I never found even a single thing else off about the house. I then quietly walked back upstairs, but by this point, I was sure this was all just a string of unusual but meaningless events. I got up to the hallway and walked to the spare room, creaking open the door. I hadn't been in there for a while, but it all looked the same until I noticed something laying on the floor by the closet. It was the TV remote for the one downstairs. Blood rushed from my face. I backed up and ran downstairs and out of the house as I called the police. Sure enough, when they got there, they found a couple other signs that someone else was inside, including a broken lock on one of the downstairs windows. Likely, whoever it was had visited my house earlier in the day while I was at work, probably driving down my driveway and knocking on the door to see if I was home. After realizing I wasn't, they probably drove away only to come back and break in. They were inside the entire night, quietly lurking around the house. Maybe they really were watching me all night. It still makes me shiver just thinking about it. When I went up to my bedroom, they must have grabbed the TV remote, and obviously they turned it on to distract me as I was walking up to the spare room they were hiding in, giving them enough time to slip out of the house. It's almost 100 times creepier that nothing was taken and no clear signs showed what they were there for. Hopefully, if anything else happens, I'll still be around to update you on it. This happened to me almost 8 years ago, and I've never stopped thinking about it. I was in my early 20s at the time and was camping out in the wilderness of Upper Idaho. I wouldn't say I was an experienced camper yet, but I did go out pretty frequently on long hikes and knew the basics of camping. Also, in that territory, there was a lot of wildlife, including black bears and grizzly bears, so being prepared was a must, which deterred a lot of casual hikers and campers. Not many people live up there either, and you'd only see the occasional tourist also hiking a trail. Most of the campsites in Upper Idaho are not very crowded. That being said, although admittedly unnecessary, I tried to stay away from those tourist-type spots and stick to lesser-known trails. For this trip, I'd chosen one that was just outside of the big mountain range that was well known. This trail just went through the forest and along the hills bordering the mountain, leading to a nice open spot with views of the mountain range. The nearest trail I knew of was 3 miles away that led to a small lake, which I assumed might have a couple other people, so that's why I skipped it. I was right though. My whole hike there, nobody else was around. The trail seemed basically unused, and when I got to the campground, it was open and empty. I set up my tent on the far side and found some big stones to build a fire pit with. I think I had 2 or 3 hours of daylight left, so I wasn't planning on doing much for the rest of the day. Just sit around the campsite and think about my plans for tomorrow. When the sun set, I built up the fire and roasted some marshmallows while stargazing. The whole valley was really quiet, just a subtle breeze coming through and the occasional wildlife calling out. But then something interrupted the silence. A repeated crunch of leaves coming from out in the woods. After a second, it was pretty obvious that it was a person walking. I didn't know what to do, except sit there and stare in that direction, kind of just shocked and confused why someone was out there, until they showed up at the edge of my campsite. It was a man, but with the shadows from the campfire flickering over them, I couldn't make out much to identify them with. I could see they had a typical camping backpack on, and that was about it. They stood there and looked at me, then at the rest of my campsite, and before I could say anything, they said sorry, then turned around and walked back the exact way I heard them come from. Also, the way they said sorry was like they were trying to be quiet. It was just barely louder than a whisper. It was really strange. What were they even sorry for? They had to be looking for a campsite. There's no way they were just walking around at night like that for no reason. It felt really, I guess, unsettling. I didn't feel in danger, but the way they acted was just out of the usual behavior of any hiker I'd ever come across. Their footsteps walked away, turning into the subtle, quiet night it was just moments ago, as if nothing had happened. Despite the unusual interruption, I ended up going back to stargazing and relaxing only a few minutes afterward. I hoped wherever that guy was heading, he'd make it there soon, and safely, but aside from that, I didn't think too much more about it. Several hours went by, or at least it felt like that. Clouds started to roll in, blocking out the moon and stars and casting a shadow over the entire forest. I wasn't exactly tired or ready to sleep yet, so I sat along the campfire and hoped I'd eventually get bored and sleepy enough to call it a night. But then I heard footsteps again. They were more rushed this time, almost like panicked footsteps running through the woods in the exact same place the man came from earlier in the night. I stood up, getting worried as they approached. Then he came into the light. I could tell by the backpack and his general figure that it was the same hiker from before. He walked further up this time, enough for me to see him better. He had a medium scruffy beard and oily black hair, along with some signs of distress on his clothes, as well as dirt scuffed over his face. And his eyes were wide, like he was scared, yet his mouth was straight and emotionless. "Is everything okay? You probably should have made it to your campsite by now. It's pretty late." The man stood there, catching his breath, but keeping on guard. His eyes looked over my right shoulder for a second, then back at me. "Are you lost? Maybe I can help," I said. He then muttered no under his breath, saying he was just hiking out in the woods and didn't mean to bother me. He spoke slowly though, and the whole time his eyes were constantly shifting to something on the right side of me. He'd only look for a split second, then his eyes would lock back onto me. Listen, you look pretty nervous. I can help. Maybe send a radio message for you, or whatever you need." He seemed to ignore what I said, but he then suddenly locked his eyes on me, more intently than before. "You're camping here right now. Why?" The way he asked it was really unsettling. His eyes darted to my right again, and I couldn't resist the urge to look over my shoulder. Empty, dark woods. I saw nothing. I was getting really creeped out now, and wasn't sure how much more I wanted to talk to this guy, let alone try to help him with whatever was going on. Then he asked something even more creepy. "Is it just you here? Are you alone? Where are the others?" Taken aback by the question, I hesitated to respond right away, and before I could even answer, he spoke again. "Have you been following me?" Something was off. His manner was changing and he was tensing up. I said no, and that I didn't know what he was talking about. But then his eyes shifted onto something over my shoulder again. However, this time, they didn't shift back to me. His wide, hollow eyes were locked onto something. He asked one last question. "Then why are you with her?" I instantly turned around and looked over my right shoulder, but my eyes fell on nothing. Still just empty, dark woods. I looked back at the man. His face fell into terror, still staring beyond me, before he suddenly broke out into a sprint, running deeper into the woods. Within seconds, he was past all the lights and completely gone. The direction he ran was nowhere near the trail, or really anything at all. My heart was still racing though. I was looking all around, especially behind me, trying to figure out what the hell that guy was talking about, and what he was seeing. In those brief moments after he asked, "Then why are you with her?" I thought I'd connected everything, that this man was being followed by some woman or group in the woods. And when I looked over my shoulder, I fully expected to see her standing behind me, deranged and terrifying. But now I didn't know what to believe. I was scared shitless though, and was absolutely not staying any longer. I gathered up everything and started moving. Even though I saw the guy run in the other direction from the trail, I was still on edge the entire walk. Every slight noise had me startled and expecting to see some woman following me, or whoever the hell he was talking about. But I never did. I made it to my car and left. The following morning, I decided to put in a note with the police station near me about the guy out there, because with more time to think about it, I was pretty worried about him. While I don't have an exact explanation for what went on that night, I can provide a decent theory for the situation after consulting dozens of people over the years. The most likely and tragic explanation is the man may have gotten lost and been out there for a very long time, probably becoming extremely hungry and dehydrated to the point of near insanity and paranoia, thinking something or someone was following him through the woods at night. Unfortunately, with him not being in the right state of mind, he didn't know help when he saw it. When he found me, he was probably too paranoid to know that I could have saved him, giving him food and water and let him out of the woods. He might have been so out of it that he didn't even know he was lost anymore and was too caught up in the paranoia of whoever he thought was following him. While this is the most probable cause of the man's behavior and what happened that night, there's still no saying if it's actually true. There's a chance he really was being followed and wasn't sure whether or not I was just another stalker part of the group and didn't trust me. If that was the case, then him freaking me out that night likely saved my life from whoever else was out there. However, we probably will never know for sure. The man was never found or spotted since, so unfortunately it seems he never made it out of the woods. I was at home this night, planning to pull an all-nighter to catch up on some work papers that I needed to have done. I procrastinated just a bit too long with these, and due to a couple other things coming up, I really had no choice but to stay up and finish it tonight. I brewed a cup of coffee, went upstairs to my office, and closed myself in to keep out any distractions and just power through the night. I did surprisingly well for a few hours, sipping on my coffee and locking in. But I could feel myself start to fade as my coffee ran out, and so did my energy. I thought maybe stretching my legs for a minute and going downstairs to make another cup would help me reset. I got up and walked down to the kitchen. But as the coffee brewed, I felt noticeably colder than I was in the rest of the house, like as if there were a cold breeze blowing through the downstairs floor. I went and checked the thermostat, and the heat was on, but it was several degrees lower than it should have been. So I did a little investigating and happened to notice a window in the back of the living room was open. Now, I did open my downstairs windows fairly often during the day, but as far as I knew, I'd never forgotten to close them before. Also, this one was wide open, not just a small crack like I usually did. Understandably, I was a bit shaken as I approached it and looked at it for a moment. The thought of someone having opened it and gotten inside crept into my mind. However, I saw nothing else to justify that. I stuck my head outside and looked at the ground beneath the window and saw no footprints or disturbances in the dirt. And there was nothing on the window, like I'd expect to see from someone crawling in. In moments like these, your mind always wants to assume you're overthinking it, and that something like this would never really happen to you. I started to assume that I just cracked open the window a bit more than usual today, and forgot to close it. With no other signs to determine otherwise, I closed the window, grabbed my fresh cup of coffee, and went back upstairs. Now, over the course of the next 30 minutes, I found my mind still wandering a bit, not fully satisfied with the conclusion I came to. So I got up and quickly gave a look around the house, just so I could be absolutely certain I was alone. I found nothing and went back to work. Another hour went by. I was mentally exhausted from trying to get this done, but a sudden thump behind me instantly woke me up. It was loud, as if it were just behind my desk, but nothing was back there. I knew my bedroom was right on the other side of that wall, and figured it had to be something from in there. But the sound was far too loud to be ignored, and with the whole window thing from earlier, it was hard to keep myself from thinking the worst this time. Still, I got up and walked into the hallway and opened the bedroom door. I scanned the room from the hallway before walking in slowly. From the doorway, everything looked normal. You'd think such a loud sound would easily be identifiable, like something having falling on the ground. But it wasn't. The floor was clear of anything, and as I searched the rest of the bedroom, there wasn't a single thing off about it. I was honestly starting to believe that pulling this all-nighter was just making me go crazy. I went back to the office, but for the next 15 minutes, it was insanely hard to focus. I knew I heard a thump behind me. It was so loud. How could it just be nothing? Eventually, my focus broke, and I spun around in my chair, looking behind me at where the sound had come from just 15 minutes ago. As I stared at the wall thinking about it, I suddenly felt stupid. There was a closet right there. It was just a small, thin closet that I used for nothing but storage of old clothes and winter jackets. I had forgotten it even existed. Curious, but not really thinking I'd find anything, I got up and walked over to it, carelessly sliding open the door. My breath left my lungs, a surge of fear crippling over my body. I was face to face with a stranger. He was only inches from me, in the back of the closet behind all the jackets. If not for the thin layer of clothes between us, he probably could have reached out and grabbed me before I even had a chance to run. I heard the entire closet tear apart as the unknown man forced his way out to chase me. As I scurried into the hallway, the man called out my name, instantly sending a shiver through me. His voice wasn't one I knew though. It was gritty and disturbing the way he said my name, as if he knew me. I made it out of the house, as it seemed the man put more effort into trying to convince me to stop running, rather than chasing me. I made it to a neighbor's house around the corner, relentlessly hitting their door until they answered and called the police for me. The man was no longer in the house when they searched it. There weren't even really any signs on to where he ran off to. And that's pretty much where it's been left at. Some creepy, disturbing, unknown man climbed through one of my downstairs windows in the middle of the night, carefully sneaking around the house and getting to my office closet, probably while I left to check the house after noticing the window. That means that for likely over an hour, the man was right behind me, watching me as I sat at my desk working. Even worse, he knew my name, which means it definitely was a planned break-in from a potential stalker. So it's hard knowing the possibility that he might come back. Had I not pulled an all-nighter that night and just gone to sleep, I very well may not be here right now. This was only a month ago. It was the weekend, and while I usually chose to stay home and do nothing, this Saturday was different. One of my best friends was celebrating her birthday, so I kinda had to go. It wasn't supposed to be a big party, only our close group of friends, maybe having a couple drinks and talking for a few hours. I lived in an apartment, just a 10-minute drive from my friend's house, and around 6:30 I drove over there. The party was nothing special. It wasn't even really a party, just a social gathering, I guess. However, we did end up drinking a bit while talking, and eventually, at just about 1 a.m., most people had either left or decided to spend the night. I really didn't like sleeping at anywhere but my own home and bed, but I also was a little tipsy still, and wasn't going to risk driving. Maybe against my better judgment, I decided I'd just walk back to my apartment. My friends said it was good for me to leave my car parked in their driveway, and I'd made the walk plenty of times before. It was just 25 to 30 minutes, and mostly through the quiet suburbs. I said bye to the rest of my friends that were still there, then set off on the walk home. The weather was calm, and the walk started out well. The whole neighborhood was silent and still. No moving cars or people outside, or even any lights on in any of the homes. Everyone was probably sleeping already. At one point as I walked though, a sudden pair of headlights came down the road. They weren't too bright, and they were going slowly until they got really close to where I was and rolled to a stop. They cracked their window, but with it being dark and them not fully rolling it down, I couldn't really see them at all. A man's voice called out, asking if I was okay or needed a ride anywhere. I said I was fine and thanked him, and without any further conversation, they drove off. I thought nothing of it. From his voice, he sounded like he genuinely wanted to know if I was okay. I kept walking along the same road. Another couple minutes went by, as the neighborhood was just as quiet as before. But then, a street sign in front of me reflected a light from behind me. I turned around, seeing that same car coming down the road, opposite of the way he came down before. He ended up pulling off to the side of the road though, and parking, rather than passing by me. I still found it strange that he turned around and came back this way, only to stop and park as soon as he was in view of me. Seemed like a really big coincidence. I kept walking, checking behind me a few times, but the guy never left his car, and eventually he was out of sight. I made it to the next section of the neighborhood, hoping this was nothing to worry about, but of course, walking alone in the middle of the night made everything feel extra suspicious. I started to feel better with every passing minute though. I was only about 10 minutes away from my apartment at this point, when I suddenly noticed a car parked up ahead. It was parked in the street with its headlights on, but not on the side of the street or on the curb. It was right in the middle of the road. As I got closer, I was able to make out more and see that it was definitely the same car from before. I felt a lump in my throat, knowing the chances of this just being a coincidence were getting lesser and lesser. From where I was, there were really only 2 routes to get to my apartment from. Usually, I just walked along this road because it would take me most of the way there, but I knew there was also a park up ahead that had a walking path cutting through the woods. I rarely used it because most of the time I made this walk, it was at night, and the path through the woods didn't have any lights or anything, so it was usually safer just to stay on the street. I was thinking this might be a scenario where it would be less risky to go through the woods, rather than walking past the car that was clearly watching me a bit too much for comfort. However, as I got closer to where I knew the entrance to the trail was, I realized the car was parked strangely close to it, like they were only a little bit ahead of it. So I could make it to the path before passing the car, but it almost seemed too perfect. As I got closer and closer, the more I looked out at the woods, the more uneasy I felt. I had to go with my gut. I kept walking, past the entrance to the woods, and toward the car. I held my breath as I passed it, but nothing happened. Once I got to the front of the car, I looked back, and through the windshield, I could see that nobody was inside. This car that had been following me and parked right in the middle of the road with its headlights on was empty. After a few seconds of thinking, I looked further back toward the woods, and barely through the dark, I could see the figure of a man standing out from behind the trees, watching me. I took no more chances. I started running, and it was only a few seconds later that I heard the man get into his car. I pulled my phone out as I ran, and thankfully that must have deterred him, because instead of chasing, he made a U-turn and left. I didn't stop running until I got home. Afterward, I told the police about what seemed like an attempted kidnapping. It was all just too coincidental to not be. What's scary to think is if I hadn't listened to my gut and did the obvious choice of cutting through the woods, I would have fallen perfectly for that man's trap of him waiting in there for me to do exactly that. Being out there in the woods at night with him would have surely left me no chance of escape. It's only been a month since, and with only a description of his car and his voice, it's unlikely they'll ever find or convict anyone.
My girlfriend talks in her sleep. At first it was cute and hilarious to tell her what she said the next morning. It was really just harmless nonsense. Like the sky is folding, or we need to raise the ground. We talked the next day about if she remembered her dream, but she never did. I wish I knew what she meant by we need to raise the ground. So, some context. Our nightly routine is for us to start cuddling and then give up once it gets too hot. Then we're both on our sides usually, back to back. She would fall asleep before I do, and so I would hear the full range of her nightly musings. Honestly, at first, I was eager to hear what she said, because it was always funny to tell her and our friends what she would say while she was deep in REM sleep. But now I'm done. I'd prefer she not talk anymore. How am I going to sleep after what happened last night? Last night around 11 p.m., she was asleep, and I was still up, just reading. Back to back. I hear her mumble something under her breath. I couldn't quite make out what she said, but I lean over from my book to peek at her face, and she is sleeping soundly. I return to my book and get back absorbed into its pages. At some point, I fall asleep. But next thing I know, I'm woken up by my girlfriend, talking at full volume. I open my eyes, and at some point in the night, both of us have turned to life face to face. My girlfriend's eyes were wide open, and she was staring right at me, no more than 2 inches from my face. But her eyes were blank, like she was looking through me. These eyes, man, it's like she was straining to widen them as much as possible. Those are the eyes I fell in love with, and right now they're scaring the absolute piss out of me. My heart rate skyrockets and my body gets a surge full of adrenaline. I throw off the covers and jump out of the bed, looking at her, and her eyes follow me like a painting, but her body stays still. For 1 second, I decided that my book light was keeping her awake, and what she had said was, "Can you please turn that off?" Now out of bed looking at her, she's not right. Her body hasn't moved, but her eyes dart from looking at me to looking around the room. I dare to ask her, "Are you alright?" But no response. Those eyes were piercing through me as I spoke, though. They are now deadlocked looking right into my eyes. Her breathing hasn't changed. She was definitely still sleep breathing for sure. That's when, while looking right at me, she says in a too deep of a voice, for her, let alone as a woman in general, "Come back to bed, dearie." My girlfriend has never called me dearie before. We have cute names for sure, but they range from pumpkin, baby, or to cupcake. Dearie sounds like something my grandmother would call me. I decide I'll get more information before I climb back into bed with a potentially possessed girlfriend. "Are you awake, sweetie?" No response. The eyes dart from me to the wall, to the door, and then to the ceiling. I'm about to nope out of the room when her wide open eyes rolled to the back of her head. The white from those eyes stood out to me, even with the dim radiance of the book light. No pupils in sight, as she insists. "Of course I'm awake. Come back to bed." With a subtle tap of the fingers on the comforter. Looking at her fingers now, I'm starting to come around. She's never sleepwalked before. Surely she is awake now if she's moving her hands. But I'm looking at her fingers as though she is pretending to have control. They are all going in different directions. Like one finger was pointing straight down, and the others to the side. Those hands are not my girlfriend's hands. They are simulating normal movement as best they can. That's when I say, "Hey, I'm going to get a drink of water, baby. I'll be right back. Can I get you anything?" Fully planning to run out of the house the moment I'm over the threshold. But my normally agreeable and sweet girlfriend decides I'm not allowed to leave. As serious as cancer, she says in that too deep horror voice, "Take one step out of that door and I will rip out your throat and shit down your neck." Shocked but understanding the importance of not letting this beast know I am in trouble, I replied, "As interesting as a proposition as that is, I think I'm going to." And thinking quickly, I grab my water bottle from the nightstand. This doesn't please my girlfriend, as she decides to start screaming and fingering her way towards me. It's a supernatural scream, so high-pitched and bird-like, I feel as though my neighbors 3 houses down were going to ask us if we heard that last night. As far as I can muster, I unscrew the lid and douse her in water. Like I knew what I was doing. Her eyes close. Her garbled appendages normalized, and she's now back asleep. I'm going to sleep on the couch for a while. Maybe forever. She'll understand when she's awake. I'm from Connecticut. I was in a long-distance relationship with a girl from Georgia, and I would often make road trips down to visit her. I don't really mind. I love road trips. I've driven across the United States and back all on my own. There's just something about traveling the highways of the US by yourself that's just so freeing. To save money, I would sleep in my car. It's really not so bad. It's basically camping in like a metal tent. Kind of makes you feel like you're really roughing it, if you will. I just recline the seat back, keep the key in the ignition just in case, and I doze off. No, I don't put anything up to block the windows for privacy, but maybe I should have. The trip down south is a comfortable 2-day drive. My stop would usually be somewhere along the Virginia-North Carolina border. So for my previous trip, that's exactly where I stopped that night. Rest stops were often less trafficked and thus quieter than truck stops. Normally I would have stopped at a Love's, but I was so tired that I settled for the first rest stop I saw. It was oddly vacant that night, with only a couple of lone cars sitting forlorn under the amber street lamps. Most likely travelers with the same idea as myself. I pulled into a parking spot away from the others, under the shadow of a tree and far from the street lamps. I figured I would have more privacy there as opposed to being bathed in light. So I did my usual thing, locked my doors, opened the window, just a hair for ventilation, kept my key in, reclined the seat, and then just went to sleep. I was never interrupted on any of these car camping nights, so I never suspected anything on this one. But then a sharp tap woke me up. At first, I thought I heard it in my dream. I opened my eyes a bit confused. Since I was leaned back, I was facing the ceiling and I couldn't see anything. I then heard another tap, like a tiny object hitting a hard surface. It came in with an irregular rhythm. Was it raining? Was water dripping onto my windshield? I'm under a tree, so maybe something fell from the branches. Maybe it was a squirrel or a bird, and maybe they dropped something. What if a squirrel was climbing around my car? Or what if it wasn't an animal at all? The thought occurred to me that it might very well be a person poking around outside. What did they want? Were the doors locked? Yes, and the keys were in the ignition. I can leave in an instant. So, still, I lay there, completely still, pretending to be asleep, pretending I hadn't heard anything. Pretty much just hoping whoever it was that they would leave me alone. It was better to not find out. I was definitely too afraid to find out. It was better to stay here in blissful ignorance. But still, the tapping continued, and it was at this point I knew I had to do something. There was no way I was just going to stay there. I literally had to look. My heart was pounding. In that moment, it was deafeningly loud. Whoever was out there could probably hear it too. I decided I was going to look. I was going to raise my head up and see what was making that noise, so that's what I did. What met my eyes sent a jolt through my entire body. every muscle fiber locked up in pure shock at what I saw. The faint glow of the street lamps cast just enough light for me to make out what I was looking at. Right there in the windshield, staring directly at me, was a face. Someone I presumed to be a woman was lying on my hood, her face pressed right up against my windshield. Her face was completely still, locked in a permanent grin. I froze in an overwhelming terror. The eyes I stared into appeared to have rolled back, showing only the whites. Her nose was turned up, pressed painfully into the glass. The lips stretched wide, revealing horrid rotten teeth. Even in the darkness, I could tell her skin was sickly pale, contrasting her long, filthy black hair. Whoever this was, she was clearly not in her right mind. I don't know how long I sat there, too afraid to move. Finally, I got a grip on myself and I shot my hand to the ignition. It turned over, making in that instant the most beautiful sound I ever heard. But for a split second, I was afraid I might be caught in a horror movie scenario. The one where the car won't crank as the killer approaches. But luckily the car turned on just fine, and I reversed as fast as I could, trying to not give this creeper time to try anything. In my panic, I remember activating the windshield wipers in a futile attempt to get her off. I thought, was I about to drive out of here with some wacko holding onto my hood? Thankfully, I didn't have to worry about that because as soon as I stopped, the woman leapt off, landing on all floors. Seeing my opportunity, I shifted into drive and I gunned it, right as I saw her reaching for the driver's side door. With my foot on the gas, I sped out of the parking lot. And behind me, I heard her let out a piercing shriek like that of an animal. I looked in my rearview mirror, and for a split second, I thought I saw her chasing me, running on all fours, with her black hair swinging wildly around her. I couldn't get a good look, as I rounded a curve in the road leading out of the rest stop and merged with the highway. Once there, I picked up speed and drove through the night. I did not dare stop again until I saw the morning light. Last month, I noticed that something was off with my boyfriend. He was being too nice recently, like cleaning up his dirty dishes and being attentive to my needs. I would have thought that this was a good thing if only I hadn't caught him waking up in the middle of the night and leaving the house. I tried waiting for him to come back, but I fell asleep after some time, and the next thing I knew, he was back in bed with me. That morning, it clicked on me like I found all the pieces to the puzzle. That's why he was acting so nice. And recently, I would admit that we haven't had sex in a while, and I thought he just wasn't in the mood. But now I know why. He was having an affair. I was furious and heartbroken, so I told my best friend, Natalie, all about it, and she was as heartbroken as me. She kept asking if I was sure about it. I mean, what other explanation could it be? He'll be gone the whole night, and he'll be back in the morning. So what did he do? Buy some damn milk or something? I said to her that I have a plan. I'm gonna wake up before he gets back one night and catch him red-handed. My best friend just nodded and said that was a good idea. So that night, my boyfriend prepared a nice meal for me, something he hadn't really done before, and I was mildly surprised. I pretended not to know anything about his infidelity, so our conversation went normally. However, when we finally settled back in bed, I had fallen asleep almost instantly. My sleep was so good that I wasn't able to wake up at midnight. I was pretty disappointed with myself. How could I have slept through all my alarms? What's even more weird was that come the next following nights, the same thing kept happening to me. I couldn't dare wake myself up in the middle of the night. I also tried staying up all night, but at some point I would fall asleep. That is really unusual since I have been a night shift employee before and I didn't have this kind of trouble just suddenly falling asleep. Sometimes I couldn't even remember what happened the night before. My crazy brain thought maybe my boyfriend was drugging me, like putting something to make me sleep through the night. That's the only possible explanation I could think of. But then I asked myself, How did he know about the plan? My heart sank as I realized the answer to my question. Natalie, my best friend. I couldn't believe it. Why would she betray me? Is she my boyfriend's lover? At this point, I was intoxicated with anger. I skipped dinner and only drank water from the tap. I made sure none of my boyfriend's drugs would reach me. My boyfriend was even persistent that I should eat or at least drink some milk. To me, that was a confirmation that he was indeed drugging me. I was about to confront him about his infidelity right then and there, but I felt a blunt force hit me at the back of my head and I was out cold. When I came to, I was tied up in bed and my boyfriend was watching me at the corner of our bedroom. He was biting his lips and he was as pale as a sheet. "What is this?" I asked him. His eyes lit up when he saw me awake. He then ran to our living room and called for someone. My heart sank as I saw who it was. It was Natalie. I yelled immediately after seeing her. "It was you. How fucking dare you?" I shouted at her. Natalie asked me to calm down. "It's not what you think," she kept repeating. "I'm gonna kill you both when I get out of here." I kept trying to free myself, but to no avail. They used some of the thickest rope I'd ever seen. "Babe, please just listen to me," my boyfriend said. "I'm not cheating on you. And certainly, Natalie and I have no romantic relationship. I get out of bed every night because I need to stay safe." "Stay safe?" I asked. "Stay safe from what?" "From you," he answered quickly. "What?" I replied. "Jace, it's near 3. We should get out of here," Natalie whispered. My boyfriend then took out a paint bucket and painted my hands and legs with red paint. I squirmed and yelled as he did it in a hurry. All the while, I was thinking, who is this person? Is this really even my boyfriend? How could he do all this to me? As if he could hear my thoughts, he kissed my forehead and said, "You'll understand everything tomorrow, I promise." Before I could reply, he and Natalie ran away and I was all alone in our bedroom. I kept screaming for help, but I knew it was pointless. My mind was racing as fast as my heartbeat. My lungs felt like it was shrinking as I was struggling for air. No. How could they do this to me? And why are they doing this? I kept trying to free myself, but I got exhausted and at some point I lost consciousness. When I woke up, I was still in bed. But I noticed that the ropes from last night left a real mark on my skin. My wrist was burning like hell too. My boyfriend was gone, and I literally never saw him again after that night. I'm a 32-year-old female, and this is something that happened to me only 2 nights ago. My husband Kevin and I were on the porch smoking a cigarette. It was about 9 o'clock at night. We live far out deep in the woods, right off of a stretch of highway that's between 2 interstate exits. We were looking up at the stars, enjoying the quiet atmosphere of the crickets, glad to have a temporary relief from all of the usual traffic noise. I heard something and I shushed my husband, even though he hadn't said anything. Was that screaming? Yes, it was a woman screaming like nothing I had ever heard before. It sounded like she was getting murdered. In between blood-chilling screams, she was screaming out, "Help me, help me." I looked at my husband, and we were both really freaked out. The more she screamed, the closer she was getting to the house. I could eventually see a figure running along the median of the highway, making their way closer to the part of the highway that was in front of our house. Our house is a good way back from our driveway, but not far enough that you can't see anything. If we could see her, that meant that she could see us. But we don't have any yard security lights. Stupid, I know. So we were in complete darkness. We could still see the highway perfectly fine due to the house across from us, who still had their Christmas lights up. I threw my cigarette in the yard, and I backed up to stand in the doorway of the house, pulling out my phone to call 911. She was still in the median of the road, screaming. If anyone else in the surrounding houses heard her, they pretended like they didn't. Kevin runs past me inside to get on his jacket and shoes. I told him not to go out there, but he ignores me and gets dressed anyway. As soon as he was out of sight, I saw a red car up the road, and it pulled over next to where the lady was at. With her in the middle, there was still a stretch of highway between the both of them. There was a man driving. I couldn't see what he looked like. I only heard his voice. He was yelling that he was going to kill her, and he was calling her a bitch. It looked like he was throwing stuff at her out of the window, maybe clothes. As soon as she sees him pull over, she starts running straight towards our yard. By that time, I was already on the phone with the police officers, but as I said, I live out in the woods, pretty far out of town, I'll add, so it would take them a bit to get there. I yell for my husband, and I tell my 9-year-old son to go into our room where the baby is and close the door. He can hear the whole thing, and he was pretty frightened. My husband runs out onto the porch and into the yard towards her. He asks if she's okay, and she says that she had gotten a ride home from this guy, and halfway down the road, he started acting really creepy. He refused to let her out where she told him to, and he kept driving with her in the car. She looked behind her seat, pretending to look at a car behind them, and she saw a roll of duct tape. Fearing for her life, she jumped out of the moving car, and she just started running down the road, screaming for help. Kevin starts to lead her towards the house, and by now is on the phone also with the police, having gathered more information that I wasn't able to give them when I called. They told him to stay on the line with them until an officer showed up. He lets her in the house, and her face looks horrible. She is red and bleeding in a couple of spots, road rash from where she had jumped out. She also said that he hit her before she was able to escape. She came in and we locked the doorknob, deadbolt, and chain. We stood together near the window, waiting for the police to show up. Kevin was giving updates and answering questions on the phone. No, they haven't gotten here yet. Yes, his car is still parked across the highway. It's a red sedan in front of our neighbor's house with lots of blue porch Christmas lights, he told them. I was trying not to lose my shit when there was a loud bang on our door. The man was yelling. I know you're in there. I saw you running. The people in there can't protect you. I shouted through the door that he needed to leave our property and if he was smart to get in his car and drive off. I told him we were on the phone with the police, but the answer he gave was the worst one I could ever hear. He says, "Go ahead. Call the police. I don't care. They won't be here in time." And then bang, bang, bang on the door over and over. The woman was freaking out and crying, saying, "Help me, please help me," over and over again. I ran to the kitchen to get a large knife just in case. We had a huge solid iron door, but our windows were easily breakable. If he really wanted to get in badly enough, he certainly could. My husband just came out from our bedroom with his gun when a squad car pulled up in the yard. 2 more following behind it, and one across the street where his car was. He took off on foot running. They tended to the woman and got her home safely, and it turns out she lives across the highway from us, about 5 houses to the left. It had been 2 hours later and they still hadn't found the man. Somehow when he ran away, he actually escaped. There are a lot of places to hide in these woods. I just hope he hides far away from here and never comes back. This happened in 2020 to 2022, over the course of the time that I lived in this apartment, with me being 21 female at the time and my husband, but then boyfriend, 22 male at the time, moved into our downstairs apartment. We loved it. It was our first place that wasn't a dorm and we didn't have roommates. When we first moved in, we only had 1 cat, but over time we ended up with 2 cats and a dog. The way this apartment was set up was duplex style, so each building only had 4 apartments, 2 on the bottom and 2 on the top. We have the bottom right apartment and behind us was a cemetery. We would always joke that at least our neighbors are quiet. Well, we were wrong. The first time our upstairs neighbor had an issue, he stood outside of his apartment and slammed his door open and closed for 10 minutes. We could not figure out what we did wrong. He wouldn't communicate with us over what the issue was, but anytime we did something wrong in his mind, he would slam his door open and close for 10 minutes, shaking our whole apartment. The night before I was flying out for our wedding, we spent the whole day at work, and then we went to a dinner for a late night meal, trying to have a nice night as our last night together as fiancés. We come home and I'm having an anxiety attack about if I packed everything. My fiance is at the passenger side door, trying to talk me through my anxiety attack, when our neighbor comes flying down the stairs yelling at us. Something about how we made noise all day, and he could not believe that we were so inconsiderate of him. My fiance yells at him to fuck off, as he's trying to protect me. Once we get inside, my fiance goes upstairs to talk to him. We figure out it's the cat tree, and every time our cat jumps on it, it hits the wall. Okay, that was easy enough. We move the cat tree from the wall. We return home for our honeymoon, and we think everything is good. My husband tries to befriend the neighbor as they both play online video games. And my husband asks if, instead of slamming the door, could he message us on Discord when he has an issue. He agrees, but that doesn't happen. I decide to call the apartment complex and let them know what happened, and they're understanding and say, okay, let's reach out to property managers, who are the other upstairs apartment. The husband of the property manager team basically tells us that we are making everything up, because he would know if his neighbor was slamming the door for 10 minutes straight, and to stop making waves. It's now the end of 2021, and I have spent my time in this apartment in fear every single day. Rent was dirt cheap, like $600 for a one bedroom, so we are going to tough it out. My husband gets told that he got a promotion, and we are moving to the East Coast. And we are excited. So he leaves, and I finish packing up the apartment. I try my best to be the perfect neighbor now that my husband is gone. I even use my earphones for everything and anything. I close stuff very slowly and try not to make much noise. It's now a week before I start to drive across the country. My friend and people from my husband's work are helping load up our U-Haul box for the day. After that, my friend and I decided to go in town for the rest of the day since my apartment is empty, besides a bed on the grounds. I drop her off at her house and then get home at 6 p.m. I decide to put my earphones in vacuum. After I vacuum, I take out the trash and lock the front door as I was going to lie down and watch TikToks. My husband was always on my case because I would often forget to lock the front door. I lay down with my earphones in and watch TikToks for maybe 20 minutes when I hear someone at my front door pounding on it. I know that voice. It's my upstairs neighbor. My dog is trying to crawl into my skin. Meanwhile, my male cat is at the window hissing at him. He's pounding on my windows now and he's yelling that he's going to kill me. I call my mom, who's 4 states away. She tells me to call 911 and not her. I'm texting my husband also and another friend. I'm whispering to 911 that my upstairs neighbor is at my door threatening me. I then hear him trying to open up my front door. Since it's a small town, cops are there very quickly. They take him away finally, and I'm left in my living room with 2 police officers. I just keep asking if he's gone. They assure me that he's going to jail for the night. My friend, who lived an hour away, had loaded up her husband in the car and drove to my apartment to get me. I spent the night at my friend's house that night. My mom arrived the next day, and I called the apartment complex again to tell them what happened. They finally believed me. Well, they had no choice. I sent them the police report. My mom and I start the drive to the East Coast early as I wanted to close that chapter, and I wasn't sleeping with the nightmares. We are in the middle of the Midwest when someone from the hospital he was committed to calls me to tell me that they released him, but I needed to call the cops for an order of protection because he was still threatening my life. I said I was halfway across the country, so he can't get to me now. He said that was for the best, given his hatred towards me. We never found out what the final straw was. If it was me vacuuming at 6 p.m., but I always lock the front door now. I couldn't be left alone for months. I was constantly checking to see if he had found where we moved to. In 2023, we came to a plea agreement since he moved home to his parents in Alaska, that if he got mental health help, I would drop the charges. We now have a pit bull who is being trained to guard me at night so I can sleep. I always lock the front door when I enter my apartment. This incident happened about 5 years ago. This is a story that I'd never really tell anymore because most people are either uncomfortable hearing it or make well-meaning comments about what I should have done in this situation, without really understanding how differently your mind works when you're experiencing absolute panic. But you guys seem to get it, so here's my story. I was living in a relatively nice apartment in downtown Memphis, working as an ophthalmic technician. I arrived home from work at my usual time, around 4:30 p.m., unlocked my door and went inside. I set my phone, wallet, and keys on the kitchen island, hearing my heavy metal front door swing shut, loudly behind me. and began taking care of some errands around the house. Having grown up in a small town, it was a habit for me to not lock my door during the day, especially when I knew my husband would be home soon anyway. I've never forgotten to lock my door once in the 5 years since this day. I walked through my bathroom and into my large walk-in closet and began hanging up the laundry that I started earlier in the day before work. My front door opened and I smiled with surprise. My husband was home a little early and I was happily called out to him. "I'm in here, love." I was met with silence and slowly began to feel that sinking feeling of something is wrong crawl up my spine. I tried to shake it off, thinking my husband simply hadn't heard me, and walked out into my living room kitchen area. Standing on the other side of my kitchen island was a complete stranger. He was male, older than me. I would estimate 50s, but it's hard for me to recall exact facial features or details from this moment. And was just standing there, staring at me. No ski mask, no weapon, just watching me. I wondered if he had maybe walked into the wrong apartment and was going to apologize and leave. But as he continued to stare, I realized I needed to do something other than just gape at this stranger in my house. I stood taller, puffed up my chest in an attempt to look more threatening, which is hard to do as a small female, and used a loud, clear voice telling him to get out of my apartment, that he had no business being there. He completely ignored me like I hadn't even spoken. Then he began to pick up my things, my cell phone, my keys, my wallet. He picked them up methodically and put them in his own pockets. That's when it really hit me that person was dangerous. I was naive enough to believe this was all a mistake until that moment. I darted forward toward the only other device that I had that would allow me to get help, my computer. I had to take a few steps closer to the intruder in order to reach it, but still had about 15 feet between us, so I knew I could grab it and run before he could reach me. As I picked it up and turned to run, I saw him start to move after me, and I sprinted back toward the bathroom because it was the only place I could go and put 2 locked doors between us. I slammed and locked the first door, and within seconds I could hear him messing with it, trying to open it. I ran into the closet and locked that door too, opening my computer and getting on Facebook Messenger to contact my husband. I sent messages after messages, pleading with him to call 911 and tell him there was an intruder in the apartment. He got the messages within minutes and assured me that he had a dispatcher on the phone and was leaving work himself to try and get to me if he could. I waited and waited. The bathroom door opened and the intruder came inside. He moved to the closet door and started trying to break that door down too. Here's the part where people start giving me advice on how I should have acted, but all I can tell you is that I was frozen, with fear, with shock. I don't know. But I didn't scream or cry or search for a weapon in that dark closet. I didn't brace the door or try to hold it closed. I just kneeled in my closet and waited to die because I just knew that's what was going to happen. People like to tell me that I lived in an apartment. Surely if I'd screamed, someone would have heard and come to help. Surely there was something heavy enough in my closet to use it to defend myself. Hell, even the laptop I had wouldn't hurt if I had swung it at someone. So why didn't I do anything? I don't really have an answer for that, but the closet door somehow held. I heard frustrated footsteps go back out into the living area of my apartment. I heard things breaking, bottles shattering, my drawers and refrigerator and cabinets being flung open as things were torn out of them. I continued to sit in that closet, silently crying, wanting to leave, but feeling that death was inevitable. I feel awful about my selfishness in that moment, but I messaged my mom, who lived in a 15-hour drive away, and told her what was happening. I desperately wanted comfort and to tell her how much I love her. I'm not a parent, but I can only imagine the fear and helplessness I put her through, knowing her daughter was in danger and there was nothing she could do to help. She messaged me constantly, begging me to keep replying. I told her I would as long as I could, but I also told her to tell my brothers I loved them, to help my husband through whatever happened next if it ended badly for me. The intruder started messing with the closet door again, mumbling disjointed words that I couldn't really distinguish. I remember hoping that the police would get to the apartment before my husband, that he wouldn't be the one to find me in whatever state this invader left me in. The front door opened again, and it was my husband, shouting for me. The intruder walked out toward the living room kitchen area again, where my front door was located, and I opened the door and darted from the closet to find my husband on the ground with him, pinning him in place. The man kept mumbling, at times yelling, but never really put up much resistance. This entire part is a blur for me. I remember feeling like the room was spinning, filled with fear, mostly for my husband at this point. Eventually, the police found the apartment. It took them like 25 minutes to arrive, which still blows my mind. I know time seems to move slowly during scary situations, so I thought it was less than that. From the time my husband dialed 911 to the time the officers arrived, it was 25 excruciating minutes. This isn't intended to bash them in any way. It just always seemed like this was an unusually long response time for a home invasion. They got my things back from the man and took him out of my apartment. I numbly went through the process of filing a police report, telling them what happened. One of the officers commented that I should really keep my door locked at all times. I remember feeling like he was being insensitive at the time or blaming me for what happened, but later recognized his words were coming from experience. I'm sure he's seen this situation and differently for other women. Within 30 minutes, the scariest incident of my life was over, but I've carried the fear, the violation, and the anxiety of having someone intrude into my space for years. If it happened to me once, it could happen again. This took place several years ago when I was 18 and freshly enrolled in college. I grew up in an extremely strict household. Asian female, by the way. My parents set my curfew at 8 p.m. I wasn't allowed to drive at night or go to parties, etc. Anyway, you could see how once I moved out of the house, I relished any opportunity to exercise my new freedom and independence. One night at around 11 p.m., I got super hungry and had a real craving for an Arby's roast beef sandwich. My roommate was tired and didn't want to go with me, so I hopped in my car and decided to make a quick trip by myself. To get to Arby's, I had to take a stretch of road that was really secluded and not well lit. Of course, at that time of night, there were barely any cars on the road. At a stoplight just a few blocks from the Arby's, I was the third car waiting at the red light. Car A was in the very front, car B was behind it, and I was behind car B. There was a last car, car C, that was behind me. All of a sudden, I guess he must have thought the light had turned, but it was still red. The car in front of me stepped on the gas and lurched forward, tapping the back of the car in front of him. The two drivers immediately got out and started looking at the damage. Neither of them was hurt, and there was little to no damage that I could see made to either car. I had no idea what to do in that situation. Again, I was a dumb 18-year-old just ejected into the adult world, and I had never witnessed an accident of any kind before. Was I supposed to stick around as a witness or something? I wasn't sure, but I felt very uneasy about the idea of getting out of my car in the middle of the night on a really isolated road to talk to these two guys, especially when I didn't think they needed my intervention at all. Again, it was a super minor fender bender, and they were talking about it civilly, though they didn't move their cars. So when the light turned green, I decided to just move over into the other lane and proceeded on my way. Again, this may have been the wrong thing to do, but I didn't know any better. The car that had been behind me did not like that I was trying to leave. To this day, I have no idea what they were thinking. At the time, I thought they must have thought I caused the accident or something. Anyway, as I shifted over to the other lane to leave, they started blasting their horn at me. I got super scared and proceeded down the road, past the green light, and car C, the one behind me, took off after me. What ensued was still the most terrifying experience I ever had. The car, which I could dimly see, had two male figures in the front seat, followed me closely for quite a while, occasionally blasting their horn aggressively. They would speed up until they were just about to hit the back of my car. I was starting to get really freaked out, so I started making random turns to lose them or to see if they were really following me. They definitely were. I made 3 left turns and they were still on my tail. Eventually, the car pulled over into the lane beside me and kept speeding up and nudging into my lane, as if trying to cut me off or run me off the road. I was actually crying now, and I had called my then boyfriend, telling him what was happening. I initially wanted to drive to his house, but then I realized I didn't want these psychos knowing where he lived. Tried to avoid making eye contact with the 2 men in the car beside me, tried not to let them intimidate me off the road. They kept blaring the horn, then eventually the driver rolled down the window. I was too scared to talk to him, but I could hear what he screamed clearly through my window, which had a slight gap in the top that never sealed up. "We're going to catch you, bitch. I'm going to kill your dumb ass." I think the guy next to him said something like, "Don't slow down," or something, but I couldn't hear it as clearly over the rushing of the wind and the sounds of our cars accelerating. My boyfriend heard them shouting over the phone and directed me to the nearest police station, which was about 8 miles away from where I was. It was actually hard for him to find the police station or to give me directions to it, because I had no idea where I was. Two guys kept shouting things at me, but I don't know what else was said because I was too busy blubbering to my boyfriend. Maybe it's really hard to remember what went on in those moments physically. I was speeding so fast to try to get away from these guys at this point that I was hoping a cop would stop me. There were no cars on any of the roads we went down, and it just made everything worse and worse. And then my phone battery decided it was time to die. I seriously thought I was one of those horror movies my parents had always told me about. Eventually, I finally saw the police station my boyfriend had given me the directions to, almost drove past it, and turned into the parking lot. The car followed me in, and the passenger door actually opened before the car even stopped. But then I think they noticed where they were, and they drove out of there fast. I sat in my car, too terrified to get out because I thought moving would provoke them into coming back. Literally 60 seconds later, my boyfriend pulled into the parking lot next to my car and climbed out with a baseball bat. He held me there for a little while, and then a cop who was pulling into the lot or something, coming out of the building, approached us and asked if everything was okay. Turns out that car had tailed me to fit the description of a car that had apparently scared a girl so badly, same type of thing late night, empty road, lone driver, and super aggressive driving and screaming, that she crashed her car into a tree in a divider, trying to get away from these guys. Neither she nor I got a license plate though, and to this day, I don't know if they ever caught those guys. I don't know what kind of human being get their kicks out of terrorizing female drivers late at night on the road, but whoever they were, screw those guys. I hope someone somewhere managed to put a stop to them.
I was on my first cross-country road trip, traveling alone in my new Lexus. It was the third day on the road, so I was somewhere in South Dakota on a desolate stretch of I-90. I had been delayed a couple hours due to heavy traffic, so it was the middle of the night, and I was still 50 miles from the hotel I booked. Even worse, I was running on fumes. I had neglected to get gas until it was basically too late, to the point that all the gas stations I was passing were closed. I was almost forced to camp out in my car at a gas pump for the night, but then I finally saw a station with their lights on. I pulled off the road and approached this lonely gas station that to me was my glowing salvation. Of course, when I tried to pay at the pump, it told me to see the cashier. I figured going in would only be a minor inconvenience, but that all went out the window when I saw the cashier. He was this greasy, unkempt creep who looked way too happy to see a woman walking through the door. When he smiled, he revealed horrid plaques on his teeth, and when he opened his mouth to say hello, I could smell his breath. I can still remember what it was like. Dry mouth, rotten sugar breath, and tonsil stones. Before I could say anything, he said, "What's a lady doing traveling alone in the long, dark night?" I immediately replied that my boyfriend was with me, but he said he knew I was lying because no man would ever send his woman to go pay for anything. He was trying to act like this sophisticated, cunning charmer, but it wasn't working in the slightest. I tried to brush it off and say I needed gas at pump 1. The cashier replied saying he was going to pump 1 later while glancing down at my chest. I told him to cut it out, that it wasn't funny and that it wasn't going to work. Then I repeated myself about needing gas. This creep just kept going though, telling me that I must be tired and should settle in for the night, suggesting I stay with him, which I flat out rejected. I was trying to be nice, but it was taking everything in me not to go off on him. The only reason I kept my cool was because I was alone with him, probably for miles. Finally, though, I was able to get him to go through with the transaction. Then I walked out the door, ignoring whatever he said as I left. Back at my car at last and pumping gas, thanking the stars that I was out of that store, I suddenly got hit with the extreme need to pee. That sort of thing had been happening to me a lot on the road, where I forget about peeing and don't notice until it's suddenly an emergency. I realized I'd have to go back in there and use the bathroom unless I wanted to piss my pants. The creep behind the counter seemed even more pleased when I showed up again. I asked him where the bathroom was, and he pointed to the corner. I rushed in there and triple-checked that the door was locked before sitting down to pee. I felt huge relief. But then as I was almost done, I heard something. The door was jiggling. I looked over and the lock was turning. The door handle turned down and the door started to open. I quickly stood from the toilet and pulled up my pants, but I wasn't fast enough to keep him from getting a peek. The store behind the cashier was dark as he stood in the doorway, staring at my groin, smiling from ear to ear, almost drooling. I screamed at him to leave me alone. Then I reached for my keys on the sink and clenched them so they stuck out from between my fingers. But he laughed at me and said that wasn't going to be enough to stop him. I thought I was going to have to fight for my life as he took a step inside the bathroom. But then, I heard something else that made him stop. There was someone banging at the door, yelling at him from outside. It was a man's voice, and he was angry, cussing at him for being lazy and not doing his job. I could hear him saying, "I can see you. Let me in. I need gas, asshole." From the sound of it, he sounded drunk enough to break through the glass. The cashier's smile faded as he turned and walked away. He must have locked the doors and turned off the lights just as the guy was pulling in, which would have pissed me off too. I waited a few seconds for the lights to come back on and to hear the guy get inside before I took my opportunity to run the hell out of there. I jumped into my car and locked the doors, then I raced away. I didn't think to call the police, I just fled. By the time I made it to my hotel, I realized it was probably too late anyway. In the morning, I found the place on my maps and called the phone number. The first thing the manager said was that they weren't even supposed to be open at that hour. They then asked me to describe the employee I encountered, and they seemed to recognize him instantly. Apparently, he had been fired a few days prior for getting too many complaints from female customers, but he never returned his uniform or his keys to the building. Knowing this, it was obvious that he had been using the lure of being the only open gas station on that stretch of road as a trap for someone like me. The manager said they would review the tapes and contact the police to get him for trespassing and possibly for assault, but unfortunately, I never heard about what happened. I left town that morning and routed around it on my return trip. Since then, I always carry a knife, a taser, and a bottle of pepper spray with me. If that random drunk guy hadn't come banging on the door when he did, I would have experienced hell on earth. Back when I was in college, I worked the overnight shift as a waiter at one of those gas stations with a restaurant attached to it. Around my second month there, this guy started coming in regularly, always between 1:30 and 2 a.m. He had greasy blonde hair with a scruffy beard and always wore the same thing, an old army jacket, jeans, and scuffed up boots. Every time he came in, he'd order black coffee, sit in the same booth near the window, and stare outside. After a week, he started trying to chat with me. His voice was hoarse, like he'd been screaming or smoking too much. He asked me my name, and I hesitated before saying my name was Jackson. He nodded and repeated it a few times, like he was trying to memorize it. Then he started to talk to me, or mostly to himself, about all the cities he'd been to that were called Jackson. He chuckled to himself about a memory his voice had trailed off into and took a sip of coffee, so I left him alone. Over the next couple of weeks, he kept showing up. He was always alone, always ordered the same coffee, and always sat in the same spot. I slowly became curious about this guy, and one night I was finally bored enough to ask him his name. He looked at me, blinking like I'd woken him up from a daydream. Then after stammering a bit, he said, "Ben." Something told me he was lying, but I didn't press him. I tried to make small talk, asking if he worked nearby or if he was just passing through. He laughed, a weird, humorless shout, looking away as he said he didn't work anymore, not since he married that lot lizard. The tone of his voice let me know the conversation was over. I had learned more than I wanted to. I was more than well enough aware of trucker slang to know that a lot lizard was a truck stop hooker, so I started to think this man was just trying to get away from his wife. After that night, we didn't talk anymore. He kept coming in, kept ordering the same thing, kept sitting in the same spot, until suddenly, he didn't. 2 weeks went by without a sign of him. Then, one night, the door chime rang, and all the air in the room stopped dead. I looked over and saw Ben standing on the doormat, but everything about him was wrong. His jacket was gone, his jeans were torn, all his hair was matted to his face, and for some god-awful reason, he was absolutely filthy. Ben stood there for several seconds, while everyone in the room stared at him, until my boss finally called out and asked what the hell he was doing. All Ben said in response was, "Don't look at me." Immediately after, Ben began shuffling across the tile, never breaking away from his 1,000-yard stare. He stumbled like he had been injured, but he had no expression of pain, only an emptiness that far exceeded his typical state. Nobody made any motion to approach him, as he made his way to the restrooms and locked himself in the men's room. However, a while passed, and Ben never came out. Eventually, my boss told me to go check on him. I knocked on the door a few times to no response. I kept calling his name, but I heard nothing from inside. My boss yelled at me to get him out of there and threw me the bathroom keys. I didn't want to invade Ben's privacy, but it was basically a direct order from my boss, so I put the keys in and turned them, then slowly opened the door. To my surprise, the bathroom was completely dark. Ben had shut himself in and turned off the lights. I called his name quietly, asking if he was okay. All I heard was breathing. Loud, labored breathing like sheer panic. I pushed the door open the rest of the way and let the light from the rest of the store spill in. I saw Ben standing with his face stuffed into the corner. His arms were crossed and tightly squeezing his chest as it rocked up and down from his breathing. Again, I called his name as loud as I could manage. Ben finally, slowly, turned his head around to look at me. His eyes were shockingly wide, almost shining back at me like a nocturnal animal. I couldn't look away. As I stared, Ben took in a full breath, then shattered my ears with the loudest scream I've ever heard. "Don't look at me." A second later, he charged out of the bathroom and ran straight into me. He pinned me to the ground and clawed at my face. He kept screaming, "Don't look at me, don't look at me." But I had my eyes shut tight and my hands covering my face to keep him from gouging my eyes out. Soon after, people came and ripped Ben off of me, but they weren't able to hold him. When I opened my eyes, I saw him running out the door with another chime of the bell. The police were called, but by then, he was long gone, and unfortunately, the security footage was too pixelated to identify him. Thankfully, Ben, if that's even his real name, never came back. It took me a few days to feel comfortable going back to work there, but I eventually just wanted to move on and forget about it. However, a few weeks after the incident with Ben, a customer as I was serving mentioned something that made me think of him. The body of a woman in her early 30s was found in a ditch a few miles down the road. She was suspected to be a prostitute, and she had been beaten to death. Her remains had been decomposing for weeks. Instantly, everything clicked. With the timing with Ben coming in all dirty and screwed up, and the lot lizard he said he married, I was sure that it was his wife. I went to the police with this information, and they thanked me for my input. Sadly, as far as I know, they never managed to find Ben. I quit that job several months later to focus on school, and that's the last I heard of it. So, he's probably still out there. Back in the 80s, I was a gas station attendant. That job was being phased out across the country around that time in favor of self-service pumps, but I only took it as a temporary job to save money for college. I grew up in a rural area, and the gas station I worked at only had 4 pumps. I worked the second shift, from the early afternoon until the station closed at 10. Things would be busy around rush hour, then slowly die out. Most people were home by 8 and not getting gas at night. However, there was this one guy that would come around every few days just minutes before close. He drove a convertible sports car and always had the top down. He was fairly handsome, but he had a strange vibe about him that always creeped me out. Most customers would keep the talking to a minimum, which is the way I preferred it, but this guy was a talker, always trying to make conversation with me. Over time, we became increasingly familiar with each other, whether I liked it or not. He asked me my name and gave me his, Sean. I never learned his last name, though. He liked to ask me what my plan for life was, not very subtly implying I should ditch my job and skip town with him in his convertible. Things only got weirder and weirder with Sean from there. He always asked me to wash his windshield, and he would smile while watching me the whole time. One day, he made a very bold remark as he pulled up. He said he'd love to have me service him every day, but he just doesn't need that much gas. Then, as he was handing me cash to pay for the gas, he said he'd pay to have me service him in other ways too. That really put me on edge. See, in that time period, especially in rural areas like that, it was quite a risk to be openly gay. I was worried this guy was some kind of cop too, so I lied and said I wasn't like that. Sean was persistent though, and even went into detail about how I could service him. I finally managed to shut it down after a few times, but I could tell he hadn't quite given up. Then, in an unusual turn, Sean showed up again the very next night, at the same time as always. I had a feeling he was coming just to see me, as nobody is ever going to burn through a tank of gas in a day under normal circumstances, though he quickly mentioned that he was going on a road trip and wanted to top off before heading out. Breaking his routine again, he got out of the car and said he was going into the store to get snacks for the road. I was just standing there, wondering why someone would start a road trip at 10 p.m. Then, a few moments later, as I was turned away from the store and pumping gas into his car, I felt something cold press against my lower back. Sean hadn't gone into the store at all. He was standing right behind me. I couldn't tell what he was holding, but he told me we were going on that road trip together. I froze up. I realized that the cashier's view of what was happening was obstructed by the pump, so I was essentially helpless. In a low, cold voice, Sean told me to put the nozzle back and close the tank. I did as he said. Then, he ordered me to go around to the passenger door. Once there, he told me to get inside and sit down. When I was in the car, he leaned down onto the door and discreetly set a pistol on it, pointed right at me. Sean said without a shred of doubt in his voice that he didn't mind shooting me if I tried to run. It would just be another hole for him, he said. Then he walked around to the other side of the car and got in. He turned on the engine and got in gear, then we were rolling away. My mind was racing as we turned around and passed the store. I felt Sean's hand on my thigh. He was smiling, telling me I had made the right choice. I could see the gun sitting in his lap. I tried to smile back and even put my hand on his to go along with it. I thought the best thing I could do was reach over to him with my other hand. Sean's smile grew wider as he reveled in his success. I let him think I was going to touch him, but then I grabbed the gun and lunged back. I told him to stop, and he slammed on the brakes, swearing at me. I said I'd shoot if he tried to grab the gun back or if he moved at all. Then I said exactly what was going to happen. I was going to get out of the car, and then he was going to leave. I was immensely careful not to slip up as I carefully got out of the car, making sure the gun was aimed on him the entire time. Once both my feet were on the ground and the door was closed, he cursed me and sped off. I immediately went into the store to tell my coworker what had just happened. We called the police and I gave them the gun as evidence, but the sheriff never did anything meaningful about it. I knew of him well and he didn't care what happened to people like me. Thankfully though, Sean never showed up again, and I was able to save up enough money to go to college and get out of that bum town. By my senior year, I had found a much more accepting group of friends. There was even a small, student-run LGBT school newspaper that reported on what was happening in the community and ran stories that the traditional media wouldn't. One day, I was reading an issue and saw a familiar face in a mugshot. Sean's face. He had been arrested for murdering and butchering a male prostitute in a downtown motel. If I didn't know already, I knew then that I would have died if I hadn't managed to get out of his car. My girlfriend and I used to live about an hour apart. This meant I spent a lot of time driving, much of which was late at night. One night, I was driving back from her place around 3 a.m. after a long night spent together. The roads were empty except for the occasional semi-truck, and most of the houses had their lights off. I remember thinking how peaceful everything felt. Just me, my car, the open road, and that sweet, sweet afterglow. Even though I had about half a tank of gas left, I decided to stop at a 24-hour gas station. I'm not totally sure why. I guess I was just enjoying the night and liked the idea of not having to worry about it in the morning. The station was nearly empty, with just one car parked near the building from the cashier and no customers in sight. The bright, fluorescent lights made the place feel isolated, like it was in its own little bubble outside of reality. I parked by a pump and got out of my car, taking another look around and still not seeing anyone. The pump gave me trouble paying with card, so I quickly grabbed some cash from my car and went inside the store. The cashier was this half-asleep middle-aged man that barely registered my entrance. I walked past him at first to grab a bottle of water, and when I rounded the corner of the aisle, I realized the cashier and I weren't actually alone. There was a woman standing in front of the coolers, staring into them with her forehead pressed up against the glass. She looked ancient, hunched over with a long, tattered coat, her silver hair stringy and unkempt. She wasn't moving, just standing there, like she was stuck deciding what she wanted. Unfortunately for me, she was right in front of the water. I really wanted something refreshing to drink, but I didn't want to go through an awkward interaction with this elderly, probably dementia-ridden old woman to get it. At a loss, I stared at her for a few seconds until she slowly craned her neck around to look at me. I immediately apologized for staring, but her reply didn't make much sense to me. She told me it's okay to be thirsty. I didn't know what to say back to that, so I kind of just turned around and walked away to the other side of the store. There, I pretended to browse for snacks until about a minute had passed, and I figured the woman probably moved away from the water. Sure enough, she was gone from the coolers, but she was also so short and hunchbacked that she could have been hiding in any of the aisles. So I grabbed a water bottle and hurried to the register before she had a chance to find me. I gave the cashier $20 and went outside, barely speaking a single word to each other. When I got back to my car, I noticed my good mood had been totally shaken by that old woman. I looked around, expecting some other creature of the night to come and ruin my night even further. But as far as I could tell, I was alone. I told myself I was just being paranoid and started pumping gas, but I kept an eye out. I finished up, got back in my car, and pulled out of the station, trying to shake the weird feeling in my gut. The drive home was quiet, just a few streetlights passing by, my tires humming against the pavement, and some chill, quiet music. About 10 minutes in, I thought I heard something shift in the back seat. A soft, rustling sound, almost too faint to notice. I thought maybe a bag fell or something, but my stomach dropped when I glanced in the rearview mirror. For a moment, I couldn't tell what I was seeing, but then it hit me. A figure was moving inside the car. I slammed on the brakes and brought the car to a screeching halt. My heart was hammering in my chest as I turned around to look into the back seat, seeing the old woman from the gas station. She was staring at me, her sunken eyes wide and unblinking. For a second, neither of us moved. I was frozen, my brain trying to process what was happening. Before I could move myself, She leaned forward, just enough to reach her bony arm between the seats and grab my bottle of water. Then she whispered something in a sickening voice. "You should drink from me instead." I didn't think. I ripped off my seatbelt and scrambled to open my door. I barely managed to get out before she grabbed me. I bolted away from the car, screaming for help as that old hag stumbled out after me, calling me to come back to her. I didn't stop until I was several houses down and hiding in someone's backyard. I knew she wouldn't be able to catch up to me or find me in the dark, so I called the police from safety. A while later, the cops finally arrived. By then, there was no trace of the woman. They checked my car, but nothing was missing. No signs of forced entry. After listening to my story, the cops said she must have slipped in while I was inside the gas station. When I thought back, I realized I had forgotten to lock the doors again after grabbing the cash out of my car. The worst part to me is that I still don't understand why that woman did what she did. Was she planning it, or was it some spur-of-the-moment insanity? Either way, something was seriously wrong with her, and even though I could have physically overpowered her, I have no clue what she was planning to do with me or what she was capable of. If I hadn't heard that tiny sound in the back seat, I don't know if I'd be here to tell the story. Now, every time I get in the car, I check the back seat, every single time.